ended about Aliyas Ezra. I'm going to read a Gemara. I'm going to move into the Parsha with this Gemara. Gemara in Makos, Chaf Gimel Amid Beis. Now we know that there's something called Beis Din. We're not talking about today's Beis Din. But there was Beis Din. They were famous Batei Dinim. The Gemara talks about Masech Avodah Zarah, the Beis Din Shalach Hashmonoyim. They're famous Batei Dinim. And all these Batei Dinim throughout Jewish history made all kinds of gzeiros and all kinds of takanas. You almost can't go through a day of Gemara where the Gemara is not talking about some kind of gzeira. Batei Dinim made gzeiros. There's only three gzeiros that the Gemara, three things that Beis Din did, which they have the power to do, but only three things that Beis Din did that the Gemara says that they got a sign from the Rabbeinu Shalom that this was the right thing to do. There are all kinds of gzeiros takanas. If you ever read Josephus, I think it's really at the very beginning. So if you ever read Josephus talks about Rabban Gamliel, who was the Nasi at the time of the Roman, the destruction by the Romans of the second Beis Hamikdash. Rabban Gamliel Hazaken, the son of Hillel Hanasi, he was the Nasi of Klal Yisrael, and they were having a very important meeting up north about how to defend certain areas. And Rabban Gamliel came to the meeting. Josephus says he was there, and he records the meeting. And he says because Rabban Gamliel came to the meeting, it was very mechubad, and they wanted to make sure that the food was appropriate. And he gives you the menu that they served the Rabban Gamliel. There was chicken cooked in milk, and on top of the chicken they smeared butter. Okay? Yeah. Right? Because you have to know the timing of when biblically you can eat fowl and milk. Yeah. Right? It's meat and milk. At some point there's a historic and there's a question about Josephus' recollection altogether. But the thing that jumps off the page is Josephus is lying, he's not lying. But yes, there was a time where Tanoim ate milk and chicken. They made a gzeira, we're not going to do it for whatever reason. They didn't hear a heavenly voice say, this is a good thing to do, we're very happy you did this. Right? Only three things. Here are the three things. Amr B'Yeshua ben Levi, Shlosh Dvar Osu Beis Din Shamata V'Skimu Beis Din Shamai Lau Yod. The three things Beis Din on earth did, and the Beis Din in heaven was maskim. He gave its approval. Elohim, Mikra Megillah. Right? The Anshe Knesset Hagdoila called the Beis Din. They instituted Mikra Megillah, and the Gemara brings down psukim for each of these three things, where God said, seal of approval. U'she'el shalom. We today take this for granted, because what we're doing is sort of an offspring of what they used to do. The Gemara says in Brachas, and here it's being discussed in Makos, that people used to say God's name when they met their friend, as a sign of love and how important that person is to you. We learn it out from Boaz. It's soon going to be Shavuos. We're going to read Rus. Vayomer lakotzrim. He greeted the cutters in his field. Hashem imachem. And he used God's name. He really used God's name. And God be with you. And he said God's name. And the Gemara learns out that that was a takana that was made for this week's Parshat, to show how truly you love your friend. You can use God's name to address him, to say hello. They got a sign from heaven. We approve of this. I approve of this. We approve of this. Today we don't use God's name anymore. Today we say Shalom Aleichem. And that Shalom Aleichem is based upon the fact that the Gemara says Shalom is one of God's names. Except it's one of God's names that you're permitted to utter. When we say Shalom Aleichem, we're not saying peace be unto you. We're saying God be with you. Okay? But Today, Shalom Aleichem is Salam Aleichem. It's a universal word. Peace be with you. God be with you. Shalom is God's name. Got approval from heaven to do that. V'havos ha'maisa. And havos ha'maisa. Rashi, havos ha'maisa. Kidaminan b'yavamas. Rashi says this is more explained in Yavamas Naf Peivav Amid Beis. The Ezra HaSoifa, when Ezra came back to Eretz Yisrael, which we were just talking about with the Oilei Bavel, and not many people came, it was 43,000, whatever the final cheshbon was, but most Jews remained back in Bavel, according to what we know. Who stayed back amongst the Jews that stayed back? The most shocking people stayed behind. Leviim. In all the Torah, who were the first people to stand up for God? Leviim. After the Ma'aseh Ha'egel, Moshe Rabbeinu says, who's with me? Bnei Levi. The Gemara says that in the 40 years that the Jews were in the desert, they basically didn't observe Bris Milah. What Shevet kept the Bris Milah in the Midbar? Levi. Medrash says that Levi did not partake in the Chet HaMeraglim. Comes now the big Nisayon, right? The atomic bomb Nisayon. We're going back to Eretz Yisrael. The Leviim didn't go. And because they didn't go, Ezra made a knas. To the extent that there are any Leviim, do not give them Meiser anymore. Bring your Meiser to the Beis Hamikdash. We're going to steep it in the storehouse, and it will be distributed like Truma to Kohanim. No Meiser for Leviim because they didn't come back to Eretz Yisrael. Lefi shlo olu imo. They didn't come back with him. The Leviim stayed behind. If you learn the last parak in Kedoshim, Asara Yuchsin Olu Mibavel, there's a Rashi there. The Rashi explains, because there are psukim that indicate that Leviim did come back. So Rashi says, Ketzutze Bahinus Olu. The Medrash tells us that it's based on a pasuk that we should say what we don't say. So we're all so busy. On Shabbos we sing Sheham Alois B'Shuv Hashem Eshivasiyah, right? So we sing that. But before you bench during the weekdays, you're supposed to say Al Narois Bavel Shom Yeshavnu Gam B'Chinim B'Zachrei Nasiyah. But I guess nobody made a nice tune to that, so it didn't catch on to sing. In the Al Narois Bavel, it says that the Babylonians said to the Leviim, Shiru lanu mishir tzion. When they brought them to Bavel, and they were al Narois Bavel, they were on the riverside of Bavel, they were taunted. The Babylonian captor said, Shiru lanu mishir Hashem. We know you Leviim, your beautiful voices. You're the ones that sang in the Beis Hamikdash all those beautiful songs. You have beautiful instruments. We want to hear that good Jewish music here in Bavel. To which the Leviim said, Eich noshi v'shir Hashem al ad masnecha. We can't sing those songs al ad masnecha on strange land. And then the Medrash continues and says that they wanted to force them to play the music. So what did they do? It's hard to even describe. It says that the Leviim put their thumbs in their mouth and bit off their thumbs. They bit so deep into their thumbs until their thumbs fell off, and therefore they were incapable of playing musical instruments. And the Babylonians left them alone. So you see that these particular Leviim, who are the Rashi calls the Ketzotzei Bahinus, they bit off their thumbs. They were very dedicated to Eretz Yisrael, and they wouldn't sing those songs Al Narois Bavel. Those Ketzotzei Bahinus, that group of Leviim, came back to Eretz Yisrael. The rest of them did not. So therefore Ezra made a knas and said, you don't go back to Eretz Yisrael, Leviim don't get Meiser anymore. I'm collecting it. And Tziva Lahavi Kol HaMaisos Al Lishkas Beis Hashem. He commanded that all Meiser to be brought to the Beis HaMikdash. V'Kohanim Halviim Shovim Meiser Rishon. And the Kohanim and those Leviim who did come back, they share now equally in Meiser. It's not a particular thing anymore for Leviim. Kitach Ezra, he brings a pasuk in Ezra. Okay. So that's what Ezra did for those who had the opportunity to come back and didn't come back. But that's history. We all sit at the Shabbos table and we ask our children, our grandchildren, what'd you learn this week's Parsha? Well, Moshe Rabbeinu did this, and Moshe Rabbeinu said that, and Avram Avinu did this, and Sari Man did that, Yaakov did this, Rachel did this. Oh, okay. And what do we have to learn from that? Well, if that's the way Rachel lived, that's the way Avram lived, that's the way Moshe lived, and it's an example for how we live. And if you go further and you say, well, this is how Jews used to live, and this is how Jews used to feel about Eretz Yisrael, and this is what they used to do, and there's times change. Yeah. So we're going to touch, just for the sake of touching it, the first Rashi in Chumash we're not going to do today, but the first Rashi in Chumash we do 3 times a year. We've done it 3 times a year. We did it at the Gra, we did it at Beis Tefillah, we did 3 times a year, I think now 14 years in a row. I do in the women's share and the men's share. 14 years in a row, we learn the first Rashi 3 times a year. When we do the Parsha share for Parshas Bereishis, when Parshas Bo comes up, because Rashi's question is, why doesn't the Torah start with Bo? So we read the Rashi in Parshas Bo. And then a couple of weeks later, before Pesach, we read Parshas HaChodesh, which is the same Parsha of HaChodesh Dalachem, and it's again the same Rashi. Why didn't we start with HaChodesh Dalachem? So we learned the first Rashi 3 times. Just to remember Rashi's question, Rashi's answer, and Rashi's answer is the reason why the Rebbeinu Shalom wrote the whole Chumash Bereishis up until HaChodesh Dalachem, even though it's not mitzvahs. Come on, bring it on. Where are the mitzvahs? This is a book of mitzvahs. Bring on the mitzvahs. What is all these stories? Put the stories in the Ein Yaakov. Rashi tells us because you need to know that God created the world belongs to Him, Eretz Yisrael belongs to Him like the rest of the planet, mankind was created by Him, mankind belongs to Him. God gave Eretz Yisrael to the Jewish people. So you need to read the whole Chumash Bereishis to get it into your mind. God created the world. He gave Avraham Eretz Yisrael. He gave it to Yitzchak, he gave it to Yaakov. You got to keep on reading it over and over until you understand that it's yours. And Rashi says, if Goyim ever come to you and say you stole the land, you tell them to read some Chumash. Okay, so we read that Rashi 3 times here. We get to Acherei Mos. We usually read the Ramban. This year we're just going to touch on the Ramban, literally for 2 or 3 minutes. We always mention this Ramban. We mentioned it, in fact, last week, but this is a Parsha. At the end of Parshas Acherei Mos, you have the Parsha Arayos. We read it Yom Kippur at Mincha, Parsha Arayos. All the women, all the illicit relationships are in the Parsha. And then at the end of the Parsha, of Arayos, there's a big Musa Shmus from the Rebbeinu Shalom about how the land will become defiled if you violate these prohibitions of illicit male-female relationships. You'll contaminate the land, you'll do this to the land. And the Ramban, like others, are troubled. What does that have to do with Eretz Yisrael? We know there's something called mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz and mitzvahs she'ein tluyos ba'aretz. Chayvus kavra, chayvus karka. The mitzvah of Shemitah is Eretz Yisrael. The mitzvah of Trumas Ma'is is Eretz Yisrael. Mitzvah of Tefillin is the Chordan mitzvah of Eretz Yisrael. That's what we talked about last week with the Rav Nevensal, Admei V'Esem Shana. Those kind of mitzvahs go with you wherever you are. You can't take Shemitah with you because you need the land of Eretz Yisrael. Now, when we're talking about prohibitions, the prohibition, you may not cut the vine in the 7th year. That's Eretz Yisrael. You can cut your vines in Muncie. No matter how holy you think Muncie is, you can cut your vines in the 7th year in Muncie. And parenthetically, because it's such a powerful story. Repeat, I said it several times. The Boston Rebbe, the one that was here in Ramat Beit Shemesh, told me that his father was the Boston Rebbe in Borough Park, and he was a big paisik, the one in Borough Park, big paisik. He was on the Moetzes Gedolei Acherei, and before he went to Borough Park, the Boston Beis Medrash was in Williamsburg, not too far from the Satmar Beis Medrash. And the Satmar Beis Medrash, Williamsburg, when we say Bedford Avenue, we say, oh, be a Bedford and J, Bedford and I, Bedford and K, Bedford and L. Bedford goes all the way into Greenpoint, it goes into Williamsburg. So they'd invited the Boston Rebbe's father to speak in Agudas Yisrael convention. The conventions where they get up at the conventions, they make all kinds of takonis, not to spend too much money at weddings and not to spend too much money on this, but it costs you $6,000 to go to the 2-night convention. Okay, so it was invited to come to speak at the convention, and there was something going on that the Satmar Rebbe had said several weeks before that, something very critical of Medinas Yisrael. And at some point during his speech, the Boston Rebbe that lived here told me his father said the following. I don't want to get into Medinas Yisrael, Medinas Yisrael, not Medinas Yisrael, but I want to just point out a simple fact that nobody in the room can disagree with. If I plant grain in a movie theater in Tel Aviv, and the grain grows, I'm going to have to take off Trumas U'Maisros. But if I plant grain in a Beis Medrash on Bedford Avenue, alluding to, I don't take off Trumas U'Maisros. That simple halachic fact that no one can disagree with tells me that there's something special going on in the movie theater in Tel Aviv that's not going on in the Beis Medrash on Bedford Avenue. He was never invited again to speak at the Agudas Yisrael convention. So there's this question: why is the Rebbeinu Shalom giving us such a musashmuz about you can't do this and you can't the illicit relationship in Eretz Yisrael? Oh yeah. It's everywhere. It has nothing to do with Eretz Yisrael. If the Rebbeinu Shalom would give you a musashmuz about Shemitah, if you don't keep, and he does in Parshas Bahar, you don't keep Shemitah, you're going to go into exile. Okay. You have to keep Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael. If you don't keep Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael, you're going to have to exit Eretz Yisrael. These illicit relationships are not connected to Eretz Yisrael. You can't go somewhere else and have these illicit relationships. So why is Rebbeinu Shalom Vatitm ha'aretz, Vataki ha'aretz? You contaminate the land will spit you out. So that's a discussion in the Ramban. So Ramban has its Perek Yudches, Perek Rafei. The Ramban Nachmani has a long discussion about how special Eretz Yisrael is, including the fact that there are 70 nations in the world. The Jewish people are the 71st nation. We don't care about how many nations are members of the United Nations. When God split up the world, after the Dor HaFloga, you count, and there are 70 nations. And of course, there are split-offs from them, but there are 70 Ummos HaOlam. And the Jewish people are the 71st. And there are 70, the Medrash tells us, there are 70 angels in heaven that are sort of the supervisors of those 70 nations below. And Jewish people don't have a supervisor above. There's no malach that was created for them, because the only supervisor they have is directly to God. As a result, the Ramban gives an example here, and the Ramban is in more than one place. When a Jewish person davens in Eretz Yisrael, he's davening directly to the Rebbeinu Shalom, because there is no malach that is the supervisor of the Jewish people. Other Kabbalah Svarim talk about it as well. When you daven in Chutz La'aretz, your tefillah goes up, and that's why Chutzlar is called Eretz Tameya. It's impure, because whatever you do there is going to have to go through, quote unquote, a malach of some Gentile nation, and so you're going through. You don't have direct klita, and therefore the whole thing is interrupted on a certain level. Mr. Ramban. And then the Ramban says what we talked about last week, second parsha of Kriya Shema, Voyim Shemoya. It says in the Voyim Shemoya, if you not Shem Torah Mitzvah, Vatem Meher Mi Alo Atzatayv, you're going to go into Golutz. And then the pasuk says, Ukshatem Lo Sayetchem, Votos Beinechem, Limatem Os Beinechem, and keep your tefillin on and put your mezuzahs on the door. Rashi asks, what are you wanting me to keep mezuzahs on the door and tefillin on my hand when I'm in Chutz La'aretz? Why would I think not? It's not Shemitah, it's not Truma, it's not Maisa, it's tefillin on my hand. It goes with me. If I'm in Golus, I have to put on tefillin. A mezuzah goes on the door. It doesn't make a difference where the door is. So Rashi there in second Parsha Kriya Shema that we learn twice a day, Rashi says, yeah, Hatzivi L'Chatzi Yoinim, Pasuk in Yirmiyah, that the Shmiras Torah Mitzvahs and Chutz La'aretz is like markers, Shlo Yilecha Chadoshim Kshetachzeru. Because the Rebbeinu Shalom said, if there's going to be a long Golus, and you don't have to keep mitzvahs in the Chutz La'aretz, you know what it's going to look like when Mashiach comes? And then 2,000 years later, we know you're not allowed we're in a PC world now, right? So you got to be careful what you say, because especially now I'm being recorded, you can say something, it's uploaded somewhere, you can lose your job, they could break your windows, you get into all kinds of trouble here. You can't say you can't even utter your own opinions anymore. So we know that there are certain people that have come back to Eretz Yisrael that don't have, because they went into Golus earlier than the Baya Sheni, and they didn't have a full Messiah Torah Shebal Peh, and they've come back to Eretz Yisrael, and there's all kinds of shaylas, mamzerus, etc., because they didn't know Hilchas Gittin, Hilchas Kedoshim, and they've come back here, and the Rabbanut had to deal with, can you marry them, can you not marry them? They were cut off from halacha for so long. So imagine if all of Klal Yisrael looked like that. Mashiach comes, and all the Americans, the British, the South Africans, Australians, everybody comes back, and they come to Eretz Yisrael, they see people wearing tefillin, they see people keeping Shabbat. They, what is this? What is this? What is this? So Mashiach has to open a yeshiva for millions of people and say, okay, let's go. Kametz Aleph O, Kametz Beis Ba, Kametz Gimel Ga. Tomorrow we're going to learn Shuruk. Okay, and in a couple of years we're going to get tefillin. So Rebbeinu Shalom said, Hatziv L'Chatzion. You're going to Golus, you got to keep these mitzvahs for a marker, so when Mashiach comes, you don't look like you know nothing. So the Ramban quotes this, which is Rashi quoting a medrash in Parshas Eikev. Ramban says the following words. Ki ikar kol ha-mitzvahs liyoshvim be'eretz Hashem. The ikar of all mitzvahs, even tefillin, even mezuzah, which is a transportable mitzvah, it's not shemitah of the ground. The ikar kiyum of those mitzvahs, he talks about this in Devarim as well, the ikar shmiras Torah mitzvahs is dafka in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, although illicit male-female relationship is not related to the ground, the Rebbeinu Shalom is warning us about this particular issue, how it's Negeya Eretz Yisrael because of the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, and because of the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, this kind of Aveira can cause Eretz Yisrael to spit you out. It has serious ramifications because of Kedusha's hearts. Is it Asa in Muncie? Of course it's Asa in Muncie. Of course it's Asa in Muncie. But the Rebbeinu Shalom never said, and if you have illicit relationships in Muncie, you're going to be exiled from Muncie, you're going to have to go to Lakewood. Yeah? If you have illicit relationships, in Muncie, well, it's a terrible Aveira. The Rebbeinu Shalom says you have a illicit relationship with Eretz Yisrael, you need to understand it's a whole different Aveira. The same way the affirmative key of mitzvah when you take your lulav and esrog in Eretz Yisrael, it's not the same mitzvah as in Monsey. You need to understand that the Aveira, it's a greater mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael than in Chutz La'aretz. You need to understand that the Aveira is a big Aveira in Eretz Yisrael than in Chutz La'aretz. So therefore, Rebbeinu Shalom says something as private and personal as an illicit relationship. You go off into a room, you do whatever you want there. Nobody knows. Private room in Chutz La'aretz. In Eretz Yisrael, it's a whole different story. There, the land will spit you out because the land is a holy land. This is the famous Ramban, Perek Yud Ches, Pasuk Chaf Hei in the Parshat. Take a look now, continuing on that subject. Nagea Ma'inyan La'inyan. I'll tell you a great story about Eretz Yisrael. It's a minute story. Somebody, Rabbi Langer, told it to me after the Tuesday shir. I think he said he heard it from Chaim Soloveitchik. And Reb Chaim must have heard it from his father, Reb Aaron Soloveitchik. That's how. At any rate, one of them, either Reb Chaim or Reb Aaron, not sure which one of them, I believe, I have to ask Rabbi Langer, was in someone's house as a guest for Shabbos. Okay, so they sing Shalom Aleichem, they sing Shalom Aleichem, they get ready for Kiddush. There's no wine on the table. And the father, the mother, and all the children go into the kitchen. And he's left there by himself. A couple of minutes later, they come back to the table with a bottle of wine. They get ready for Kiddush. At Kiddush, so after Kiddush, that he asks the Baal Habayis, is everything okay? I saw you and your whole family went into the kitchen. Hey, Baruch Hashem, everything's okay. But we just opened a bottle of Carmel wine. And whenever I open a bottle of wine that comes from Eretz Yisrael, I want my family there so they can breathe. As soon as you pop open the cork, the air of Eretz Yisrael comes out. And I want, if I can't be in Eretz Yisrael right now, I want my kids, my wife, to breathe some Eretz Yisrael air at the very least. Okay. Okay, so Avira Eretz Yisrael Machkin, and take a little, I got a little smell from Eretz Yisrael. Parenthetically, I had, Baruch Hashem, all my children, grandchildren live in Eretz Yisrael, were with us for the Seder, in contradistinction to the Tafshin Pei Seder. So everybody decided we want to all be together, so we're all together. And there's one set of grandchildren that likes Kedem grape juice. And my son knows that I don't drink Kedem grape juice. So I live in Eretz Yisrael. There are like 20 companies that make grape juice. You can drink from grapes from which Trumas and Meisos were taken off. Mamash Kedushas Haaretz. Why do you want to drink Kedem grape juice? Okay? So we had this discussion about Kedem grape juice. But people, these are Dova Pshutim, Paris Haaretz, wine from Eretz Yisrael. What is the chus to drink wine, grape juice? What is chus to eat an orange? An orange that had Trumas and Meisos was taken off from it. Okay, it tastes like a sun-kissed orange from Florida. You got to hold it in your hand and understand what you're holding. It's Paris Haaretz, Trumas and Meisos. It's not the sun-kissed orange. Okay. So we have here a second parasha that we read is Kedoshim. You shall be holy. Is that one of the 613 mitzvahs? Machlekes Harishonim. Some Rishonim say Kedoshim to you is a mitzvah. You shall be holy. Well, how do I become holy? Okay, you have to learn how to become holy. But it's one of the 613 mitzvahs. Other Rishonim say it is not one of the 613 mitzvahs because it's something called a mitzvah klali. The Torah is not telling you to be holy. The Torah is telling you that when you put on your tefillin, you should do it in a holy way. When you put on your tzitzis, put it in a holy way. What the Torah is telling you is the mitzvahs that you do either should make you holy or do it in a holy way. But it's not a new specific mitzvah. It's machlekes Kedoshim to you. I think I mentioned this. I had, it was many years ago in Eretz Yisrael. At the time I still had single children, so my boys would bring home boys of friends from the Mir for Shabbos. And sometimes they brought home friends of friends. Anyway, we had over at the house for Parshat Acherei Kedoshim, a young man, more than one young man, some young men that learned by Reb Simcha Wasserman, Zechron Tzadok Levracha, in Yerushalayim. And he's telling, I asked him, no, would you like to say about Torah? He says, yeah, okay, I'll say about Torah. So he said, I remember exactly how the story went, but this is basically what Reb Simcha said. He said that Reb Simcha once asked boys that were in his house, and he was there, what is the mitzvah of Kedoshim to you? Be holy. So, different boys give different answers. This one says, have a prushim and arayas, Rashi. This one says, the Ramban, menuvel b'shas haTorah. This one, and he said, no, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, nobody's got the answer. So I say, okay, Rebbe, what do you want? What does Kedoshim to you mean? He said, the word Kedoshim to you means holy and normal. Okay? Not an extremist. You're a human being. You need to be a holy human being and understand that there's a side of you that's human that can be elevated. Holy and normal. We mentioned the Kotzker Rebbe many times and brought down in the Sfasemis and Pash Mishpatim. Anshe Kodesh Tiyunli Ubasa Basad the Treifa Loisechelem. Very strange pasuk in Pash Mishpatim. Anshe Kodesh Tiyunli. You should be holy people. Ubasa Basad Treifa Loisechelem. Don't eat tarfus. If we were writing the pasuk, we would certainly write it differently. Anshe Kodesh Tiyunli V'Shimru Shabbos. Anshe Kodesh Tiyunli V'Anichu Tefillin. Anshe Kodesh Tiyunli and don't eat treif. So the Kotzker is quoted as having said in Yiddish, Menschlich heilig zolt ihr mir sein, ich hab schon genug Malachim in Himmel. As Vasemis brings this down Pash Mishpatim, that the Kotzker said, Anshe Kodesh, human holy, I already have more than enough Malachim in heaven. The Baruch Shalom is saying you're a human being. If I needed more Malachim, I can create more. I got plenty of them already. I created you as a human being so that as a human being, and what a human being does, like eating, be holy when you're eating. Okay. So we have a mitzvah or an exhortation in this week's Pasha, be holy. So this is from Rav Gil Devere. We're only going to read a small piece of it. From Rav Gil Devere, who brings together different pieces from Rav Kook, Benagay the Parsha. He's talking now, he's going to try to give us an understanding of Kedusha. He quotes a Gemara in Shabbos and Daf Yud Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, Kol ir shegagoyseh gavoyim beis hakneses l'sayf chareva. A city that builds its buildings, the roofs of its buildings are higher than the shul structure, that city will eventually be destroyed. The roof of the shul should be the highest roof in the Jewish community. Shenema, the pasuk says, "L'roy mesbeis l'keil hamanas chavaisa." V'hani mili, the Gemara says, "B'batim." This halacha is only about houses. The roof of houses in the Jewish community should be lower than the roof of the shul of the community. Aval b'kashkushe v'avrure less lumber. But if in the city they want to build towers or like fancy, I don't know, just decorative things in the city, they want to build the string bridge. It's just something colorful. We don't care about that, the Gemara says. You can build those things as high as you want. The one thing that we're makbid on is that private homes, the roof should be lower than the roof of a shul. If you want to build your aesthetic stuff higher than the roof of a shul, go ahead, do whatever you want. That's the Gemara. Okay. The kasha that Rav Kook deals with is, why are we makbid on a private home and we're not makbid on all these other buildings? You want to build something, aesthetic, make it as high as you want. We don't want you to build your private property, your private home, higher than the shul.
Can I just say something parenthetically? I was in a taxi coming into Jerusalem, and the taxi driver asked me, why is there a kink in the spring bridge? And he told me, he said, it's because you can't have it straight higher than the Ir Kodesh in the old city, Harabai. It has to show some sign.
That's why they bent it?
That's why they bent it.
Okay. Interesting. So, I'm going to say the Rav Kook outside. You're free to take it home. Read it. Obviously, all handouts are always given out for you to be free to take home. So I'll say what he says. He says there's a difference between where you live and what you build for aesthetic reasons. Torah is not going to compete with your aesthetic priorities. Aesthetics is superficial. It's something that's really beautiful on the outside, and you don't really care what's in the outside, right? You want to make this beautiful thing that everybody should look at it and say, wow, that's so beautiful. Right? It may be rotten on the inside, right? But beauty. I forgot what the English saying is. The eyes of the beholder. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. The beauty, right? It's a superficiality. So if Chazal would have said the shul has to have the highest roof, and not even an aesthetic building can be higher than that, so that would have created in the minds of people that Torah is now competing with aesthetics, right? Our roof is higher than that beautiful building because our building is more beautiful. So now Torah has become a competition of outer aesthetic beauty. So Chazal said, we don't really care about what you do with your aesthetics. Build those towers as high as you want. We're not competing for the superficial aesthetics. You know what we're competing for? We're competing for where you live. What's inside you? Where does a person live? Inside his house. We want to make sure that you understand what's inside your house is subject to what's going on in the shul and the Beis Medrash. So you need to know that when you build your house, your roof can go up to here, but the shul is going to be higher. Why? Because you need to look up to the shul, because you're going to bring the shul into your house. The shul, your house is on a lower level than the shul. And you're going to look up to the shul and bring the shul down into your home so you can live that kind of life. Aesthetics, do whatever you want with your aesthetics. We're not competing for what it looks like on the outside. So in Mela, Rav Kook writes that because in Kedusha is concerned not with what something looks like on the outside. Kedusha is concerned with what a person is on the inside. Therefore, Chazal made this rule that when you're dealing with Kedusha, your house roof is lower than the shul roof. And when you want to deal with aesthetics, do whatever you want. I'm not in the business of aesthetics. You want to build the Twin Towers, build them as big as you want. People look up and say, wow, that's the biggest building in the world. Look how big that is. So say that. We don't care. We're not in competition for the superficiality of life. We're in competition for who you are and what you live for. You live in your home, and you're going to bring that shul that's higher than you into your home. but we don't want you to look up at the aesthetics and say, "Ooh, is the aesthetics higher? Is the shul higher? Is the not interested?" We're not even going there, right? We are not going to enter the ballpark called what's more aesthetically pleasing, the shul building or the tower building. We're not going there. We are building a shul for Kedusha. Kedoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. The life of a Jew has to be built on this idea of Kedusha, sanctification. What does sanctification at the bottom line really mean? What does sanctification really mean? So Rashi says a number of places. Kedusha can mean the worst thing in the world. The pasuk in Devarim says, "Lo siya kadosh, lo siya kadesh, lo yeh kadosh." There shall not be a male prostitute. There shall not be a female prostitute. What's a male prostitute called? A kadesh. What's a female prostitute called? A kadesha. What does that mean? So Rashi says the word kadosh simply means mizuman. I'm prepared to do something. I'm ready to do it. I'm ready to do it. You pay me the right, I'm ready to do whatever you ask for. That could be a prostitute. When we're dealing, lahavdil, with Kedusha, we're saying to the Rabbonu Shalom what the Jews said at Har Sinai, Na'aseh v'nishma. When the Rabbonu Shalom said to Moshe, before Matan Torah, he said to Moshe, "V'kidashtam hayom u'machar," you will sanctify these people today and tomorrow. Rashi says, you shall prepare them. What does preparation mean? I'm ready to go. My backpack is packed. I got water. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm ready to do. I got all the tziyud with me. Just tell me what you want. And in response to the Kidashtem Hayom U'Macha, the Jew said, Na'aseh v'nishma. Just tell, I'm ready to do it. Na'aseh v'nishma. I can do anything you want. Just tell me what you want. The kasha of nishma v'naseh, it should say, first tell me what you want, then I'll do it. No, there's a whole different group of people here. Na'aseh v'nishma. I'm packed up, ready to go. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm ready to do. Just tell me what you want now. That's called Na'aseh v'nishma. That Na'aseh v'nishma was in response to the Kidashtem Hayom U'Macha. Kidashtem means, as a Jew, we are ready. We are ready to do the Rabbanu Shalom's will. We just need to know the will, but we're ready to go. That's Kedusha. And that's what we get in a Beis HaKnesses and the Beis HaMedrash, whether it's through tefillah, davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or learning Torah. What we do is, bottom line, is we're trying to, if someone would ask you, what are you basically doing in the Beis HaMedrash? Oh, I'm learning Shoshana Chasapara. Yeah? What are you doing? What are you doing? No, really, what are you doing there? What are you doing? I'm learning Torah to prepare myself, so at a moment's notice, I know what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants from me. When the Torah says in first Parshat Kriyas Shema, "V'shinantam levanecha," the Gemara in Kedoshim says, "V'shinantam miloshin shinun," sharp. Sheyu divrei Torah mechudadim b'ficha, she'im yishal adam dava al tegamgim boy. A person has to know Torah so clearly, so if someone asks you something, you don't even have to study. You can just have the answer. It's about being ready. It's about learning to know. It's about learning to do. I know what to do, and that's what I'm doing in the Beis Medrash. I'm doing in the Beis Medrash to be a Kadosh, and a Kadosh means I'm ready with the materials and the tziyud that I need to be an Oved Hashem. And that's Kedoshim to you. Rav Kook brings out this idea in such a beautiful way in the halacha of a Beis HaKnesses. We're not going to compete for the superficial stuff on the outside. We don't. As important as it can be, a person, the Gemara says in Brachos, has to have a nice house, he has to have a nice wife, has to have nice furniture, because if you don't have these things, you get depressed. Now, of course, every person on his level. Some people think a nice house is this. Some people think a nice house is this. Of course, everything with its borders. So aesthetics is important, but aesthetics is not where life is. And we're not going to compete with aesthetics. Your home is your home, and it looks up to the Beis Medrash. It doesn't look at the big towers. Oh, I saw this big tower They have very beautiful windows there. I'd like to use those windows in our home. I went into this beautiful building. They had such beautiful tiles in the bathroom. I'm going to use those tiles in my home. And we all know we live like that. We see something here, we bring it. But that's not life. We're not in competition for the beautiful aesthetics of big buildings. We're looking up to and trying to bring into our lives the Beis HaMedrash and the Beis HaKnesses. Everybody have a wonderful Shabbos Kodesh.